We begin in New Orleans, where the dead rest above ground and the living walk beneath them, a city of sealed attics, missing bodies, and legends that refuse to stay quiet. But the story doesn't start here. It starts across the Atlantic, in Africa, where the oldest vampires were not pale aristocrats, but spirits, witches, and creatures born from hunger and grief. Today we trace the line between them, from the French Quarter to the forests and coasts of West Africa, to see how two worlds shaped the monsters we think we know. The night air in New Orleans is thick enough to feel like breath. Gas lamps flicker along Charter Street, their light trembling against the old convent walls. Somewhere a shutter bangs once, twice, then stops as if a hand has steadied it from the inside. In this city, the dead do not stay quiet, and the living do not always stay human. New Orleans was born in a place that should not hold the living. A swamp, a floodplain, a bowl of land that sinks a little more each year. From the beginning, death was a neighbor, close, familiar, unavoidable. Yellow fever epidemics swept through the city in waves, killing thousands. Bodies were stacked in makeshift morgues. The ground was too wet to bury the dead. So the city built tombs above the earth, white stone vaults that heat up like ovens in the summer sun. In a place where the dead rest in houses of their own, where the air is heavy and the nights are long, stories grow like mold, and some of those stories have teeth. The year is 1728. A ship from France docks at the edge of the young colony. On board are young women, les filles à la cassette, sent to marry settlers and civilize the colony. Their belongings are packed in narrow wooden chests called cassettes. The shape is unfortunate, long, rectangular, coffin-like. The girls are taken to the old Ursuline convent, where the nuns will supervise them until marriages are arranged. This part is documented. What comes next is not, but it is believed. Locals whispered that the chests were too heavy for clothing, that the girls were too pale after weeks at sea, that the nuns kept them inside for reasons never explained. And then there is the attic. The third-floor shutters of the convent were sealed, not merely closed, but nailed shut. The nails were said to be blessed. The shutters never opened, not even for ventilation in the brutal Louisiana heat. The official explanation was that they were protection from storms. The unofficial one, something inside needed to be kept in. The legend grew because the convent refused to explain the sealed attic. Silence is fertile soil for fear. And New Orleans is a city that waters its legends well. Move forward to the early 20th century. The French Quarter is rougher then, a place of sailors, drifters, and cheap boarding houses. Two brothers, John and Wayne Carter, work on the riverfront. They are quiet men, unremarkable, the kind who disappear into crowds, until one night, a woman escapes from their apartment. She is bleeding, weak, and barely able to stand. She tells police she has been held captive, tied to a chair, cut repeatedly, her blood collected in cups. When officers break into the Carter apartment, they find more victims, some alive, some not. The brothers are arrested, tried, and executed. This part is documented. What's not documented, but widely repeated, is what happened after. According to local lore, when the family tomb was opened years later, the bodies of the Carter brothers were gone. Some say they were seen again in the quarter, unchanged by time. Others say their tomb is still sealed but empty. The truth is simpler. Records from that era are incomplete, and tombs were often reused. But the legend persists because it feels like something New Orleans would allow, a crime so brutal it slips into myth. New Orleans was a port city, a crossroads of the world. With every ship came stories. Slavic immigrants brought tales of the Upir, a bloated, ruddy corpse that fed on the living. Romanians carried the word strigoi, spirits that rose from the grave to torment families. French settlers spoke of the revenants, the returned dead. Spanish colonists whispered of El Vampiro, a shadow that drained life. These stories merged with African spiritual traditions, Caribbean folklore, and Catholic ritual. In New Orleans, the undead were not monsters. They were neighbors. They were warnings. They were explanations for grief that had no other language. The city became a tapestry of borrowed fears. And in that tapestry, vampires found a home. One of the oldest vampire legends in the city centers on a man known only as Jacques Saint-Germain. He appeared in New Orleans in the early 1900s, wealthy, charming, fluent in multiple languages, and strangely ageless. He hosted lavish parties but never ate. He only drank wine, or what looked like wine. One night a woman fled his apartment, claiming he had bitten her. When police arrived, Saint-Germain was gone. His rooms were filled with fine antiques, old coins, and bottles of wine mixed with blood. No record of his arrival. No record of his departure. The legend ties him to Comte de Saint-Germain, an 18th century European figure rumored to be immortal. Historically, the connection is impossible to prove. But in New Orleans, impossibility is not a barrier. It's an invitation. Not all vampires in New Orleans are legends. Some are alive. Modern vampire houses, subcultures of people who identify as vampires exist quietly in the city. Some practice consensual blood sharing. Others focus on energy work, ritual, or identity. They are not supernatural. They are not immortal. But they are part of the city's living folklore, a reminder that myth is not always ancient. Sometimes it is breathing beside you. New Orleans is a city shaped by colonial violence and epidemics, slavery, fire, blood, loss and rebirth, and loss again. It is a place where trauma lingers in the architecture. Vampires thrive in such places, not because they are real, but because they explain what is. They are metaphors for disease that drains a city, grief that refuses to stay buried, hunger that cannot be satisfied, and the way history feeds on the living. New Orleans did not inherit vampires. It created them. Because some wounds need a face, some fears need a name, and some cities need their monsters. The shutters of the Ursuline convent still stay closed. The tombs still sweat in the summer heat. The quarter still hums with stories after midnight. And somewhere in the narrow streets where the gas lamps flicker, a shadow moves just out of sight. Not because vampires walk the city, but because the city remembers them. And memory is its own kind of haunting.
New Orleans doesn't exist in a vacuum. Its vampire stories didn't rise from the river alone. They're echoes, shadows carried across an ocean. Because long before the Carter brothers, long before the sealed shutters of the Ursuline convent, Africa already knew the shape of hunger. And when people left their homelands, their stories came with them. So now we turn the map. We leave the French Quarter behind and follow the bloodline back across the Atlantic. We're traveling into the heart of Africa to meet the iron-toothed hunters, the energy-drinking witches, and the night-walking spirits that shaped some of the earliest vampire traditions on Earth. These aren't caped aristocrats or pale immortals. These are creatures of the forest canopy, the crossroads, and the village threshold, beings that drain life not always through blood, but through essence, vitality, and spirit. And unlike the vampires of Europe, these ones were never meant to be romantic. Our first vampire comes from the Akan people of Ghana and Ivory Coast, the Asan Bosam. This creature lives not in crypts or abandoned houses, but in the upper branches of the forest canopy. Hunters described it as humanoid, but with hooked iron teeth and legs that bend the wrong way, ending in curved talons. The Asan Bosam doesn't stalk prey on the ground. It waits in silence. It stays still, suspended above the forest trails. When a traveler passes beneath, the creature drops from the branches, hooks its legs around the victim, and bites deep with those metal jaws. The Asan Bosam is one of the earliest recorded blood-drinking beings in African folklore, predating European vampire literature by centuries. One hunter from the Brong Ahafo region told researchers that he once climbed a large silk cotton tree after spotting movement in the branches. He expected a monkey or a porcupine. Instead, he found something hanging in the canopy, a shape he couldn't fully see, but with long legs ending in hooked, claw-like feet. He said the creature didn't attack him. It didn't speak or roar. It simply shifted its weight on the branch, and the hooks scraped against the bark with a metallic sound. The hunter panicked, lost his footing, and fell partway down the trunk. He limped back to the village, convinced he had seen the being the elders warned about, not because it harmed him, but because it was in the exact place the stories said it would be. He never climbed a silk cotton tree again. Then there is the Obeafo, also from a Akan tradition. It is often described as a witch vampire, a person who can leave their body at night and drain the life force, or sunsum, from others. Unlike European vampires, the Obeafo doesn't always drink blood. It feeds on vitality, especially from children or crops. Entire harvests were said to wither under its influence. The Obeafo leaves traces the way a storm leaves pressure in a room. People say the first thing you notice is the light, not bright, not sharp, just a thin, wandering glow that slides along the walls as if it's searching for a seam. It doesn't behave like fire or moonlight. It moves with intention, slow and hungry, brushing the edges of windows and door frames as though tasting them. The smell then comes next. Sweet at first, almost pleasant, like fruit left too long in the heat. But beneath it is something faintly spoiled, a softness that clings to the back of the tongue. Elders say that scent is what the Obeafo can't hide, the trace of a spirit that has slipped free of its body and forgotten how to mask its hunger. By morning, the air feels hollow. A child wakes with heavy limbs, eyes are dull, the voice thin as thread. Sometimes there's a small, darkened spot on the skin, a place where the sunsum was touched. The room around them feels drained, as if something has taken more than it needed and left the space sagging in its absence. Outside, the garden tells its own story. Leaves that stood firm the night before now hang limp, their color dulled, their stems bowed as though they've been emptied from the inside. Animals refuse to cross certain thresholds. A dog that normally sleeps by the door will whine and back away, staring at a patch of air as if something invisible still lingers there. And sometimes, just before dawn, someone sees a shadow slip across the floor in the wrong direction, moving against the firelight, returning to the body it left behind. No one speaks of it loudly. No one calls attention to the person whose eyes seem a little too restless that morning. Where the Asan Bosam is a monster, the Obeafo is a neighbor, someone you might pass in daylight, unaware of what they become after dark. If we travel east toward Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya, you will find a different kind of vampire, the Nightwalker. These beings aren't always corporeal. They're described as spirits or revenants that rise from improper burials, violent deaths, or unresolved grievances. Nightwalkers drain life not through blood, but through fear, paralysis, and nighttime encounters that leave victims weak, sick, and disoriented. Some traditions describe them as tall shadow like figures with glowing eyes who travel only at night. They'll knock on doors to lure the victims outside. If you answer the knock, you fall ill. If you follow the voice calling your name, you may never return. Nightwalkers represent a bridge between the physical and spiritual vampire, a being that drains life without ever touching the body. Africa's vampire traditions are some of the oldest on Earth, and they remind us that the line between folklore and survival has always been thin.
New Orleans has earned its reputation as America's vampire capital, but the stories we explored today show that its legends didn't form in isolation. They grew out of real conditions, epidemics that emptied neighborhoods, burial practices shaped by the land itself, and a population built from multiple cultures forced to coexist in a city that was always fighting its own environment. The sealed attic of the Ursuline convent, the Carter brothers' case, the sightings of Jacques Saint-Germain, each of these stories reflects a moment when fear, uncertainty, or unexplained violence demanded an explanation. And in New Orleans, those explanations often took the shape of the undead. But the deeper history reaches farther back. Across the Atlantic, African societies had long documented beings that fed on life. The Asiman of West Africa, the Beafo of the Ashanti, the Impundulu of Southern Africa. These figures were not European vampires. They were tied to illness, misfortune, witchcraft, and the struggle to understand forces that threatened families and communities. When Africans moved across the ocean, their belief traveled with them, preserved through memory, oral tradition, and cultural resilience. In Louisiana, those beliefs encountered French Catholicism, Caribbean spiritual systems, and harsh realities. The result was not a single unified legend, but a layered one, a blend of African, European, and American interpretations of what it meant for something or someone to drain life from a community. Today's stories show how vampire traditions are not just tales of monsters. They are reflections of public health crisis, colonial violence, cultural blending, and the human need to explain suffering. They reveal how societies interpret loss, fear, and the unknown, and how those interpretations evolve when cultures collide. New Orleans and Africa do not share the same vampire, but they share the same questions. What threatens us? What haunts us? And how do we make sense of the things we cannot see?